Yeah, thank you, Eddie. Thanks for your service. Thanks for your service, Paul. Everybody who's made this meeting possible. 23 participants on a Friday afternoon. Fantastic. My name's Anthony B. I'm a grateful recovered drug addict alcoholic. Today, I'm a grateful member of CA. You know, it's nice to be a small part of a big whole, and that is a member of the 12-step program. It took me long enough to get here. I kind of picked up around 1975, and I come into recovery in 2015. I was born in 1966 in a place called Paddington in London. And I was born into a dynamic of a family where my parental dynamic changed pretty quick, and my parents split up. My mum's side of the family were all Irish, and my dad's side of the family were like London Irish. And when they split up, my dad, he was a partner in a removals firm, and they were moving, some up and coming bands at that time. But my dad was a chronic raging alcoholic, and my upbringing was quite feral, really. It was a bit dysfunctional, it was a bit feral, it was a bit boundaryless. My dad's parents weren't alcoholic, none of his siblings were alcoholic, but my dad was a raging chronic alcoholic. And I see a lot of violence as a kid, and it instilled some fear into me. And then that fear kind of turned into a rebellion, and I rebelled. I was quite a good kid up until about the age of about 9, and then we moved from one area in London to another area in London, and I was just starting the 4th year junior school. But I believe that the ism, it kind of precedes the ick, the internal spiritual malady I self and me in that incredibly short memory, or I sabotage myself. Welcome to anyone new, anyone back from a relapse, anybody who might be on the bridge of reason, anybody who's still jaywalking. And what I mean by that is if you read the jaywalker in the book, it gives an illustration of a jaywalker. And we can all identify with that jaywalker. But what it's really all about is the ego getting smashed and the ego reconstructing. The doctor at the back of the book, Dr. Harry Tebow, if you look him up in the medical view, and look it up online, it's about the ego. So welcome to anyone new, anyone back from a relapse, or anybody who might be on the bridge of reason, or anybody who's still jaywalking, I say that, by the grace of God, good sponsorship and getting connected to a power greater than myself, my mind's not give way. Since February 2015, one day at a time. So I want to pick up heroin, crack, cocaine, prescription drugs, private doctors, national health doctors, prison doctors, or alcohol, which I found out when I got here was just a part of a symptom. The ism, as I said, precedes the ick. And what is the ick? It's the drug addict, it's the alcoholic, or whatever type of addict. And then when I did pick up, I liked the effect it produced. And I lost the power of choice. I lost the power of control. There was no choice, there was no control. And I was quite, when I was a kid, I was quite extremely dishonest, extremely selfish. I was extremely inconsiderate, extremely self-seeking and fearful. And I'd go work with my dad. My dad had various jobs, but he had a job in Camden as a dustman. He had the best round. He had like all of Hampstead High Street, all of the heat. It was, just loads of celebrities on this round. People like at that time, Richard Burton, Elizabeth Taylor, John Cleese, the Goodies, Peter. It was just loads of people. And and my dad, he was a bit of a thief. He was a bit of a cheat. He was a bit of a liar as well because he was a raging chronic alcoholic. And then I'd see him doing a bit of dishonesty, and then I kind of bought into that dishonest way of life, and I was put in some good positions as a kid. I worked some fruit stalls at Speaker's Corner, North London. I worked in an Italian restaurant, but I bought into the criminality way of life, and I thought that was the way of life. I didn't know anything about the ego. My ego attached to it. And I was one of them kids. I'd be playing brag, going out just shoplifting to play brag, 3-card brag, 7-card brag, and fruit machines, and everything I'd done was done to the excess, and it was kind of done to the extreme. And the drugs just progressed, it just progressed, and eventually, I just fell into this dirty cup. And I'm only reflecting back on hindsight where I can see that now. And I just spun in this dirty cup for nearly 40 years. There was no human power. I was beyond human aid. You know, my parents, sibling, girlfriend, peers, employers, you know, authorities, none of that was sufficient enough to restore me to sanity around the question of the first drink or drug. I said, I didn't know what I actually suffered with. You know, I didn't know what I actually suffered with. And today, when I got armed with the facts about the condition, you know, that I suffered with when I first got it. So it was detox centers, treatment centers, prisons, you know, and in the detox center or the treatment center, you know, what happened to me is that the amygdala, I didn't know that I was driven by fear either. I didn't know that book talks about being driven by 100 forms of fear: self-delusion, self-seeking, self-pity. So I didn't know anything about anything until I come into recovery. And what had happened to me in the therapeutic environment would be that the amygdala would come up. And I was of that type. I was constitutionally incapable of being honest. You know, it describes me really well. I put myself into the book because I'm the real alcoholic, I'm the real drug addict, and I have to put myself into that book, and I could really identify. And the more I read the book and keep reading the book, you know, the more I keep jumping out of them pages. And the book shows me the problem, it shows me the solution, it shows me the action that needs to be taken. But I didn't know anything about that till I got here. And I turned up here, you know, at 49 years of age, after spinning in that dirty cup for nearly 40 years, you know, and then I believe by God's grace, I got a window of opportunity. I got an act of providence took place. But, you know, the book talks about being beaten into a state of reasonableness. There's a bigger book than the big book that tells me that godly sorrow drew me to my knees and God humbled me. And then this time round, you know, I cried out to God with all prayer and supplication. I was done. God, please help me. God, I'm begging you, please help me. And something profound happened for me. You know, I was actually in a prison cell at that time. That's not a requirement for membership. You don't have to have done anything that I've done. The only requirement for membership is the desire to stop using cocaine and any other mind-altering substance. You know, and I landed up hitting my knees and I cried out to God with all sincerity from the bottom of my heart. And he come. He talks about it in the book. And in the last analysis, he was there. You know, and I ended up getting to this meeting and I heard this fella come in and share this message. And he said this, he says, as a result of getting connected, he said, to a 12-step program, ultimately to a power I choose to call God. He said, I've not committed no crime for 15 years. I went, what? He went, I've not picked up a drink or a drug for 15 years. He said, I've not been near a prison cell for 15 years. He said, I'm the only time I ever come back to these places, he said, is to hopefully carry a message and give someone some hope, inspiration, encouragement, and let them know his way up beyond the gate. And then he said this, on this one, he said, it's not about the gate at the front of the prison. He said, it's about the gate that's within your mind. And when he said it, because the step 3 prayer, I'll get to it after, but it doesn't say relieve me from alcohol or drugs. It says relieve me from the bondage of self. And then when he said it, something really hit me anyway. I kind of got a bit of literature. God started to reveal himself to me. And I kind of started working the first 3 steps. Now, I believe God's grace was always there for me. Even when I was in active drug addiction and alcoholism, you know, God's grace was always there. Times when I could have died overdosed behind the wheels of cars or been in some very sordid situations where I could have got killed or killed someone in that situation. Thankfully, thank God that didn't happen. But I believe that the grace of God was always there for me, you know, and because there's times when I reflect back on hindsight, I should be dead in some of the situations, circumstances and equations that I put myself into, you know, what it's like when you're using and you're boozing, you know, and so I'm very fortunate in that respect. So, but, you know, when I got here, as I say, I heard that message and then God just turned the traffic light from red ambers to green. See, I needed to cross the river of denial, you know, because when I tried to control a drink or a drug, I couldn't enjoy it. And when I enjoyed it, I could never control it, you know, and it just, there was loads of consequences as well, you know, loads of consequences. So the consequences weren't sufficient enough, though, to keep me clean or keep me sober. You know, the act of providence needed to take place, as it talks about in the 12 and 12 as well. You know, that needed to take place. And when that took place and God humbled me, you know, and I see this window of opportunity. I saw that with the desperation of a drowning man, you know, and that flimsy read it talks about in the book, and the powerful loving hand of God. And I landed up getting to the oldest 12-step provider in Europe, which turned out to be an absolute blessing. But I was 22 days in this therapeutic environment. Now, you don't have to have been to a treatment center or a detox center or a prison. You don't have to have done anything I've done. We all come in on different ships, but we're on the same boat. It talks about it on page 17, Steerage the Captain's Table. It talks about the diversity and the equality and all the different walks of life we get in these fellowships, whether it be CA, whether it be AA, or whatever type of fellowship. We get all different types of walks of life, you know, in this. This disease doesn't discriminate a race, a creed, or a color, or a walk of life. You know, it's very rapacious. It's a rapacious predator. It wants to kill, it wants to steal, and it wants to destroy. It wants to take everything from you, you know. So when I got here, you know, I got to this treatment center, and I've never completed a treatment center in my life, you know, and I got down on my knees. I'd started working the first 3 steps before I left that institution, that establishment in London, and I got to this treatment centre, and I knew it was the last house on the block. It was the last port of call. It was the last chance to loop. You know, you can either go on to the bitter end, you know, blotting out the consciousness of your intolerable situation, or you can start looking for spiritual help. There's no half measures. There's no easier, softer option. There's no middle of the road solution, you know. And for me, I was beyond human aid as well, you know. So I got to this treatment centre, and I knew that I needed to start working the steps. But the only way I could do that was with God's help, you know. And I was told to get down your knees and ask God to help you, to be fearless and to be thorough. Because when God humbled me to my knees and I started, you know, working the first 3 steps, I could see it was evident that change was happening. You know, even when I was in that prison in London, and people were, now I was of that type. I went to any lengths in any environment I was in to use or booze, you know, and thankfully that's all changed today, you know. And but people were coming in and offering me bits of stuff, and I had the money to, if I, you know, and I was knocking it back, and I thought, how is this happening? This stuff's really. I've got a brother who celebrates 24 years this year as well. His wife celebrates 22 years. My current sponsor's 31 years. I think my first sponsor's about 22 years, and I'm in my 11th year. You know, so I could see something was happening. There was a shift. God was doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. Now I landed up getting to this 12-step provider, which was the oldest one in Europe, and I think it was a 22-day detox they give me, and then the amygdala started to come up for me again, the fight or flight. But I got humble. I hit my knees again, and I said, God, please help me. You know, and he did. And I went to the medical team and said, look, you know, what I actually wanted was a single room. And I said, look, no disrespect to anybody in here. I said, but, you know, when I'm like this is life or death for me. You know, so I said, I'm asking you nicely. I said, if you don't do that, then I'll just get on and get the money changed to another treatment facility. It's as simple as that. But they did. They landed up giving me a single room down in I went to their secondary unit, and it was like in a little rural village, and this building had a little church built onto it. And I've got this single room as well. It was a double room, but they give me as a single. And anyway, one morning I've gone out for a jog, and as I'm jogging around the corner, I looked, and I see this place, and it looked really familiar. And I looked at the place, I thought, I know that place from somewhere. I know that building. And I walked into this car park, and I looked, and it was a treatment facility, the last one I was in before the one that I just completed in 2015, and I was there. I was there 15 years earlier. So I just knew that God had showed up. I just knew that God had showed up. I landed up getting to step 7 in that treatment centre. I met my first sponsor whilst I was in that treatment centre. I met him at a meeting called Living in the Solution. And then I went onto a day program. He said, do that first. So I got up to step 7 in the treatment center. I went through this day program. It's fantastic, this day program that was here at that time. I went through the steps there. Then I went through the steps of my first sponsor. Then I went through the steps on the retreat, workshops, book studies. You know, I just kept doing this stuff, and it was all in different ways. And I still do that today. But what I'm really going to get to in this share is about living in steps 10, 11, and 12. You know, my life's revolutionized. It's changed as a result of getting clean and getting sober. You know, I had an accident in 2023, which kind of You know, it put me back a little bit, but I'm starting to get a lot better now. I've got about 75% use of my arm, and things are starting to come into fruition in the mainstream again. So, you know, things are going good for me. So I can't complain. But what I really have is I'm not cured. What I've really got is a daily reprieve, you know, contingent on the maintenance of my spiritual condition. So I've got to keep doing this stuff. I made a commitment. I made a, you know, in the first 9 steps, in 1 to 3, I started to give up. You know, in 4 to 7, I started to own up. 8 and 9, I started to make up. Now, living in 10, 11, and 12 is where I start to wake up. You know, and this is a daily thing. I fully conceded in the first step. I made the 100% admission around the powerlessness and the hopelessness and the helplessness, and that I suffer from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. I accepted the second half of the first step, that my life had become unmanageable. You know, I accepted the propositions in step 2. You know, was he now willing to believe in the power greater than myself? I said yes. He said, God is or God isn't. I said, God is. You know, I got down on my knees and I've done the first step 3 prayer on my own. And I said to God, God, I'll do whatever you want me to do. Just please keep me clean. Please keep me sober. Whatever you want me to do, I will do. And I said the prayer. Then, you know, I got fearless in 4 to 7, started tweezing out my defects in resentment, fears, harm, sex conducts. You know, that got revealed to me in step 5 when I admit to God, to myself, and another human being the exact nature of my wrongs. You know, I confessed it to God. I was entirely ready. I confessed, and God's took a lot from me. You know, 6 and 7 is the engine room of the steps. You know, for me, it's about repentance, because change ain't change until you change, and I had to change. You know, and there's been a big change in me. Really has been a big change in me. You know, and in 8 and 9, you know, I made that list, and the list really revealed more than what the 4 and the 5 did. The 4 and the 5 are about my defects, but the list, the step 8 list, revealed what I'd done. You know, and then I got out and I started making direct amends, you know, to such people who have possibly meant to do so and injure them or others. And about 95% of my historical amends are done. But it's not about what I say, it's about what I do. Actions got to speak louder than words. You know, my parents unfortunately passed away. I robbed them of a lot of peace of mind. My dad, I drove him neurotic at the end, you know, and robbed him of money. You know, he left me money, and you know, all that type of stuff, and also other people, you know, that I had to go back and make amends to, institutions as well. And 95% of that is done. But it's not just about what I say, it's about what I do. You know, I started getting out making amends after, it was about 3 months after I'd come out of a treatment centre. You know, and I've had to do indirect amends. I've had to do direct amends, financial amends. And it's not just about what I say today, it's about what I do and how I conduct myself in society. I was of that type. I don't know about any of you lot, but I was of that type. You know, I'll take your gear off you and I'll help you look for it. You know, and I was just of that type. You know, and if it weren't nailed down, I'd take it. And I don't do any of that stuff today. I don't do any, even if I drop a bit of litter on the floor today, you know, I've developed a God consciousness. I'll pick that up and I'll put it in the bin. You know, and I weren't of that type, you know, before previous. I've had a psychic change. You know, I've had deep, effective spiritual experiences. I get them in the moment, and the spiritual awakening starts coming as I'm living in 10, 11, and 12 and practicing and trying in 10, 11, and 12. You know, and in step 10, it says, you know, this thought brings us to step 10. We continued to take personal inventory and set right any new mistakes as we go along. We vigorously commenced this way of living as we cleaned up the past. That's the 4 to 9 process. It says we have entered the world of the spirit. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. So it's to grow in understanding and effectiveness, to be effective. This is not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime. Continue to watch for selfishness. Now, that's manifested into various ways. You know, selfish and self-centeredness is the root of the trouble. It says being driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, self-pity. Dishonesty, right? That's manifested into various ways. Resentment, it says, is a number one offender, destroys more alcoholic addicts than anything. From its stem all forms of spiritual dis-ease, it talks about, and spiritual sickness. So if I'm in resentment, you know, I can start being judgmental. I can start being critical. I can start being envious. I can start being jealous. I can start being self-righteous. I can start being self-arrogant. You know, and then it says about fear. The book talks about being driven by 100 forms of fear. You know, I never knew anything about that till I came into recovery, and I got a sponsor who started guiding me through the steps. But not just with the sponsor, I needed to up my game in all areas to make sure I was doing what I needed to do for my recovery. You know, and then it says when these crop up, it doesn't say if they crop up. We ask God to remove them at once. So I've got to kind of take all thoughts captive to the obedience, and I've got to try and catch it in the moment. You know, because my ego, you know, the enemy, the illness, the lower power, or if you like, the devil, is just waiting there, you know, to try and hook me. Yeah, right. But today I know that I'm in a spiritual battle, and thankfully I do know that today. And it says we discuss them with someone immediately and make amends quickly. So I can phone a sponsor, I can phone someone who I talk to, I can do it. These days you've got a rapid 10, you know, you can do on the spot as well, which is a fantastic little tool. And it just gets it out of your head. It's on thing, and then you send it to someone. You can do that actually in a meeting. You can do it anyway if you can't get on your phone. You know, it says we discuss them with someone immediately and make amends. So if I've harmed someone, I try to make an amends properly, or I've said something, or I've said something that ain't sitting right with me. I need to make an amends. I need to apologise for what I've not, you know, for what I've said or what I've done, for my actions. And then it says, if we've harmed anyone, then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. Love and tolerance of others is our code. So I'll think of someone I can help. I could either bring a newcomer, get into a meeting, try and carry a message, or I work with someone on a one-to-one basis, or I do some service somewhere else. I try to always meet the three sides of the triangle today. You know, I always try to be in the unity, try to be in service and in recovery as well. And you know, because it's not just about the meetings from the preamble to the serenity prayer, the recoveries from the serenity prayer to the preamble. You know, it says, and we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol or heroin or crack or cocaine or prescription drugs. So by this time, sanity will have returned. So what does sanity mean? It means wholeness of mind. Because if I got, you know, lack of power was my dilemma, you know, and my mind would always buy back into the lie when I was in that spiritual malady. It says, once the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. It says, if tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. I remember being about 6 months in, and some fella come up to me and said he had a bag of Valium, and he went, a big bag of Valium, and he went, "Do you want to buy any of these, mate?" And I kind of looked at him and I went, "No, you're all right, mate. I'll see you later." Pre-recovery, I'd have probably took them off him. And he says, but I don't do any of that stuff today. I got restored to sanity, placed into a position of neutrality. I mean, I can go into pubs today. You know, I remember my brother coming to pick me up from a treatment centre, and we was going to a meeting, and he took me into a pub. And I think he just wanted to see how I was going to react, just for food, but just to see how I would react. But thankfully, the merciless obsession had been removed around the drink and around the drug. But God to give me the garden, but I've got to maintain the garden. I'm the one that's got to clip the garden. So it's the same as watching my defects. He says, we react sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. We will see our new attitude towards liquor has been given us without any thought or effort of our part. All I've done is work the first 9 steps. So after I've done the first step 5, he went to me, go and pocket your pride, go and read page 75 and ask God, you know, and thank him from the bottom of your heart. And I just followed the instructions on page 75. And then there was a couple of things I kept in the back pocket that I didn't really want to share with him, but I knew that this was the last house on the block. I could continue going on to the bitter end, and I didn't really want to do that. So I rang him up and said, "Look, man, I've got a couple of things I need to share with you." He started laughing. You know, he started laughing, and he went, "It's very common. A lot of people do it." He said, "A lot of people." He said, "I'd say 99% of drug addicts and alcoholics do it." Then he said, "It just comes. This is the miracle of it. We are not fighting it. Neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we've been placed in a position of neutrality and protected. We have not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We are neither cocky or nor are we afraid. This is our experience. This is how we react as long as we keep in fit spiritual condition." How do I do that? Right. So it's going to get to that in a minute. How do I do that is when I wake up in the mornings, I try to pray. You know, for me, my step 11 is reading the Bible. You know, I try to enlarge on my spiritual life that I'm a redeemed sinner saved by grace through faith. And then as I go through the day, you know, I ask God in the mornings. I say to him, "God, you know, please direct my thinking, divorce from self-pity, dishonesty, or any self-seeking motives. I say, please still show me what I can do for the man who's still sick, and the right next thing to do. God, how best can I serve thee? Thy will, not mine, be done. And then as I go through the day, I've just got to try to be receptive to what he's trying to show me. Because it says each day is a day when we must carry the vision of God's will into all our activities. But it does say it's easy to let up on the spiritual program of action and rest on our laurels. What's our laurels? It's yesterday's victories. I can't rest on that. Whatever I've done yesterday ain't going to keep me clean and sober today. I never got iron yesterday's supply, and I don't stay clean on the shower or the bath that I had yesterday. It says we are heading for trouble if we do, for alcohol, heroin, crack, cocaine, prescription drugs is a subtle foe. We are not cured of alcoholism. What we really have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. There's a bit of scripture, it's a proverb. It says, never boast of tomorrow, because you never know what this day may bring. Let someone else lift you up and don't be wise in your own eyes. There's also another bit of scripture where the Lord said, don't worry about tomorrow, tomorrow will worry about itself. So all I've got is today. I've got a 24-hour period just for today. It says, every day is a day when we must carry the vision of God's will into all our activities. How best can I serve thee? Thy will, not mine, be done. These are thoughts which must go with us constantly. So I've got to try and stay in conscious contact with the pilot. I've got because I'm the co-pilot. All I'm doing is I'm his agent. I'm here to do the footwork, what he bids. So I've just got to make sure that I'm staying in conscious contact with him. And sometimes that's not easy. Sometimes I can get in the way still. And then I've got to learn from the mistakes that I'm making, as I just read there in step 10. Then it says, these are the thoughts which must go with us constantly. We can exercise our willpower along this line. All we wish is the proper use of the will. So it says, I do the review, I check to see where I'm, I'll just read this quickly. It's a bit of scripture from the step 10. And it says, use step 10 to keep your house clean. We got a house clean in step 7 and step 9. Yeah, it will. We have all heard of someone who has gone back to drinking or drugging after a period of being dry. And it's worse than it was before. So in Matthew 43 to 45, it says, now when the unclean spirit goes out of a man, it passes through the waterless places, seeking rest and does not find it. Then it says, I will return to my house from which I came. And when it comes, it finds it unoccupied, swept and put in order. Then it goes and takes along with it 7 other spirits more wicked than itself. And they go in and live there. And the last state of that man becomes worse than the first. So I've got to watch myself, because my thoughts determine my actions determine my habits determine my character will form my dynasty. And also another bit of scripture, it says, submit therefore to God, resist the devil, he will flee from you. Draw near to God and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. And that's step 10, right? So, but in step 11, 10 and 11 are conducive steps. You can't do one without the other. They're conducive, which means that they're conducive to help me work the step 12. But when I retire at night, I do constructively review my day, and I do mine in the morning now. I used to do it in the evening, but I do it in the morning now. I check to see if I'm resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid. Do I owe an apology? Because if there's any grosser handicaps or any worse items in stock, as I wake up in the morning, then I get that out, I pray and I get that out and I ping it over to my sponsor. I still cultivate gratitude as well in the mornings. It's not just an action. It's not just an expression. It's also an action. Same as love is not just an expression. It's an action, right? So it says, I check where I'm selfish, dishonest, or afraid. Do I owe an apology? Have I kept something to self? My ego might want to maximize something or minimize it. Was I kind of loving towards all? I have to put myself into that as well. What could I have done better? There's always room for improvement. If I'm not growing, I'm going, right? There's always room for improvement. Was I thinking of me all day? Was I preoccupied in self all day? How I do that, I do 60 to 40. Was I thinking about what I could do for others? I do 40 to 60. I do it out of 100. Was I thinking of me, it's less, 40, 60. Was I do it thinking about others, 60, 40? Was I thinking about what I could pack into the mainstream? That's the same way I do that in a percentage rate as well. But I don't slip into remorse, worry, or morbid reflection, because that would diminish my usefulness to others. Then I've got to pray for forgiveness and the correct measures to take, and then when I do that, then you know, I retire at night. I do mine in the morning, as I said. And I practice that in the mornings, and then I continue with my own awakening. You know, and 10 and 11 are conducive steps. And I try to pause when agitated or doubtful. I try to pray for the right thoughts and actions. I try to pray for inspiration, intuitive thoughts and decisions. Now, I've been in situations where I really wanted to say something to someone, because there's life and death in the tongue, but there's restraint in the pen and the tongue. And I've just had to go, God, how best can I serve thee? Thy will, not mine, be done. And then something totally different has come out of my mouth, or my actions have been totally different. You know, and this stuff really does work. So the first 11 steps for me are the alignment, you know, and in them first 11 steps, it's very imperative. I've got a friend in Canada who broke this down. Most of us know him now, Cameron F. And it's mentioned in the book 124 times, work with others. Right. That's what this work was really designed for, was to give it back and work with others. Right, you know, but the 12 steps got a wide spectrum on it. And it says in the 12th step, it says, we've had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. We try to carry this message to addicts and practice these principles in all our affairs. But the original manuscript of this said, we've had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. We try to carry this message to others. And in bold brackets, it was especially alcoholics, and practice these principles in all our affairs. You know, I'm of the school, I'm only a student of this book. The more I think I know, the less I know, right? You know, and I, you know, I'm a Christian, I'm a redeemed sinner. I know where all this comes from, you know, and it was revealed to me quite early doors. You know, it all comes from the Bible, but whatever you choose to believe in is your choice, right? But up for me, you know, I believe in the Bible. You know, I believe that I'm a redeemed sinner saved by grace through faith, but faith without works is dead. I believe everything that I do today is preordained by God, you know, and so there are times that I can still wrestle, you know what I mean? But I've got to go back. You know, when I make mistakes or come off the trajectory, I've got to go back, for me, to the foot of the cross. You know, I've got to keep seeking God's will. I've got to keep seeking it. But in step 12, it's broken down into 3 bits, step 12. And but the original writings of this, right? You know, some of the teachings, I'm going to read this. It says, teachings of Reverend Sam Shoemaker that inspired each step, the impact of Shoemaker on ideas incorporated into AA. Every AA who stays in our fellowship or CA long enough to be exposed to its big book, its 12 steps and its meeting buzzwords, will readily recognize thoughts that seem to have come directly from the books and other writings of Sam Shoemaker. Well, he only got it from the Bible anyway. This should not be a surprise. Bill Wilson said that AA's step ideas came directly from the Oxford groups, as it was led in America by Reverend Sam Shoemaker of Calvary Church. So the medical fraternity and the religious fraternity stepped in to help the early members. Right. In fact, Bill actually asked Shoemaker to write the steps, but Shoemaker declined, saying that they would be written by an alcoholic. Many years along the line, Bill specifically dubbed Sam Shoemaker as a co-founder of AA. And here is just a partial listing of many ideas from Sam Shoemaker's books, writings, and sermons that were incorporated in the AA Big Book and Steps. Well, I'll read a few of these. These include 1, self-surrender. 2, self is not God. 3, God either is or he isn't. 4, turning point. 5, conversion. 6, prayer. 7, fellowship. 8, willingness. 9, self-examination. 10, confession of thoughts to God, self, and another. 11, amends. 12, thy will be done. 13, spiritual experience. Is this all coming to spiritual awakening? Is this starting to make sense? 15, the unmanageable life. 16, power greater than ourselves. 17, God as you understand him. 18, 4 absolutes, honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love. Guidance of God. Faith without works is dead. 21, love thy neighbor as thyself. 22, clear references to the Almighty using biblical terms as our creator, maker, father, spirit, God our father, and father of lights. 23, the Lord's Prayer. Jesus, Sermon on the Mount. 25, self-centeredness, fear. So they stepped in. There's a little, whenever I'm working with others, after the fall to the first, it says inquiries by medical, scientific, and religious societies will be welcomed. I reference straight to the back of the book to page 569 because there's you got the after the spiritual experience, you got like the medical view, the Lasker Award, and the religious view, and there's a lot of information just in them little chapters. But I'm a really grateful member. My life's changed. It's revolutionized as a result of taking this action. Yeah, acknowledged. As a result of taking this action, you know, I've traveled. I go to conventions, but before I got here, I'd spent a long time in and out of prisons, but it just weren't about the physical incarceration. It was about the mental. It's like I was enslaved, which is a common peril with the addict and the alcoholic. But thankfully, that's all changed today as a result of taking this action. It's all changed as a result of taking this action. That can happen for any of you if you're willing to put the action in. It's about willingness, honesty, and open-minded are the essentials of recovery. But I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for asking me to be of service, Paul, and God bless every single one of you.